You're in the darkness. You feel the eyes upon you. They're creeping up oh so slow. You turn and scream, your hands fumbling against the wall for a light switch. You flip it on and gasp. It wasn't the monster you feared. It was me, all along. Ha ha. Alright, well, let's talk about horror, thrills, and twists. I'm author DC Ferguson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. I'm gonna put this out there right away, and you might not like it. If you take in a lot of horror and thrillers, you might notice a trend in this video, and that is most of the best examples are going to be prior to the year 2000. The reason for that is that 90% of all horror since then is absolute garbage in my opinion. Now, before grabbing your pitchforks and torches, I'll also say that a good 70% of all horror prior to the year 2000 was also garbage. When I look at horror, we need to pan for gold harder than in any other genre. The reason for this is the same reason that your camp counselor was doing more to induce eye-rolling with these flashlight stories than he ever was sending kids back to sleep in their tents afraid. Something that is truly scary varies for everyone, but there are some universal terrors that can be intense for pretty much everybody. Well, we're going to touch on that. A lot of what it takes to understand horror, thrills, and plot twists is understanding psychology and what not to do. So we're going to look at some all-time greats for sure, but mostly we're going to be looking at the missteps here. A thriller, by its very name, thrills the audience. It evokes tension, surprise, and creates a bond to our protagonist. If we like them, then we sympathize or empathize with them, and their struggle ties our emotions up in the plot too. This facet, by all measures, is magic. There is no scientific way to measure it. It isn't tangible. But if we love a fictional character enough, our hopes and fears become entwined with theirs. We worry about them, feel for them, care for them, and hope for their safety. I wouldn't dare quote anyone on this but the master, Stephen King. He said, "I try to create sympathy for my characters, then turn the monsters loose." It sounds like such a simple formula, which amazes me when you look at how often this gets screwed up. We actually have some side-by-side comparisons for this that can illustrate the problem. Here's the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Our main character, Nancy, was played by Heather Langenkamp. I know this because I cared about her character in the first movie, even though the actress that played her literally only appeared in these 3 Freddy Krueger movies and nothing else I've ever seen. Let's talk about Nancy in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake of 2010. She was played by the incredibly famous Rooney Mara of Girl with a Dragon Tattoo fame. I know this because IMDb told me so. I completely forgot she was in this movie. So we're off to a bad start already. Rooney Mara is a very talented actress. The Nightmare on Elm Street remake is a very bad script. And here we are. So let's talk about Freddy, our villain. Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger, and the incomparable Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy Krueger. Both of them are talented actors. You could even make a compelling argument that Jackie Earle Haley is the better of the 2 actors by a decent margin, and I wouldn't fight you on it. However, let's look at a breakdown of some of the key pain points between these interpretations. First, let's analyze the face. Freddy Krueger was burned to death, and now tortures children from beyond the grave in their dreams as a burned-faced psychopath. Robert Englund emotes with his face just fine. It's horribly scarred and bubbled and exposing muscle. Compare this with Jackie Earle Haley. The makeup team, for whatever stupid reason, decided to go for the look of an actual burn victim. Think about that in Western culture for a second. This is the face of a twisted, sick bastard that got what he deserved and still won't die. This is a face that immediately evokes sympathy and compassion. It's too real. We can't even go further from here. The fangs are gone. That's it. Wrap it up. Movie's over. Well, no. They soldiered through, and now we have to also. So, let's talk about motivations. First, in the original, there was a vague Freddy hurts kids. Maybe 1 or 2 kids went missing. The parents in the town burned them to death. Not to be outdone, he decides to take revenge on these parents after death by going after their children in the town and killing them in their dreams. Now, compare this to the strange choices in the remake. First, they tried to build sympathy for the devil by making it sound like Freddy was a simple janitor, and when bad things happened, the parents may have overreacted by killing him. So there's this question he may have been innocent for a little while. Then the twist is that he was a child abuser all along, and this new power to kill kids in dreams is just him being more evil. So to recap, first the parents were right, then they were wrong, and the kids were paying for it. Then they really were right, and the kids were paying for it anyway. While all this investigating was going on, they forgot the part about being a scary movie. Too many scenes were bogged down with this investigation subplot, so when they turned the monster loose, we didn't have any sympathy for the characters yet. We didn't know them enough to care. We were too busy worrying if we should feel bad for Freddy or not. Now, follow the plot of a lot of the slasher films of the 70s and 80s, and even later in the Scream series in the 90s. The reason that these worked where others failed is that we focused on one protagonist who's going to be our sole survivor, and then we watch them develop and interact with their friends as each one of them gets picked off one at a time. Each new death is someone we knew a little bit more about than the last person, which gives us a chance to develop the supporting cast further. We keep the monster in the closet until we need him. We don't open the closet and do a sit-down interview and have some tea. This is how you know that Johnny Depp was the very last person to die in the original Nightmare, and I think maybe this guy was the last one in the reboot? I don't remember. And I saw this movie 3 times. Yeah, 3. Just to be sure I didn't like it. And I wanted to like it so bad. Shame. Twists in a plot, like our friends' horror and thrills, are uniquely tied to the psychology of writing. This is one more of a juggling act than the other two. With the other two, we're maintaining our suspense, we're building sympathy for characters, you're using your monsters sparingly. Those are all qualities of good storytelling in general. Stick to that formula and you can succeed. Twists, though, that requires some finesse. Give too much away and the twist is predictable. Don't have your audience emotionally invested in the characters, no one cares. Get too artsy and cryptic, then the twist is just another bizarre turn in a weird story. Now, I had to set out some rules before we look into this for a few reasons. One, if you haven't seen it, then this is going to be a spoiler, so that's first. 2, we really muddy the water if we talk about movies that have been made from books. So even though it's guilty of a lot of mistakes, we won't be talking about films like I Am Legend. So here's a fancy spoiler alert as we discuss The Village and the number 23. Alright, now that you've been fairly warned. The Village appears to take place in a 19th century farming community. Where it takes place isn't that important until the twist. So the short version is this. The village is surrounded by evil monsters that keep the town in fear. Our protagonist is a blind girl. There's a lot of suspense in dealing with the monsters as the blind girl unravels the mystery of them with a boy that she's smitten for. When he nearly dies, only modern medicine can save him. The town council sends the blind girl past their borders, and the monsters don't attack her because the council were the monsters in costume, trying to keep everyone away from the edge of a modern-day national park that they live in. I'd actually argue the twist here is solid. We have some real problems, though. The protagonist is too pure, too sympathetic, and too nice. It makes her so two-dimensional that you're not invested in her story, because she really has nothing going on in her life. This story is probably the most exciting thing that'll ever happen to her. The other issue is also the tonal shift. This goes from a horror film to a drama with some social commentary. Now, had this been a drama from the start, and the protagonist been more compelling, I'd actually argue the twist works. Then there's the number 23. After years in comedy, I was dying to see Jim Carrey take on some psychological horror. The short version is that he's a guy that gets this book, the number 23. As he reads it, he finds that it mirrors his own thoughts and feelings, and he starts seeing the number 23 involved or connected to everything. He begins his descent into madness, becoming obsessed with the book and the significance of the number. In the end, he finds out that he's the one who wrote the book, and it's a confession of a murder of passion he committed before getting amnesia in the suicide attempt that followed. So, here's what went wrong here. The name of the movie, the book, and his obsession is all a complete red herring. A red herring is a clue or a plot device that looks like or seems significant, but actually means nothing. This works to great effect in mysteries, where the red herring is meant to throw you off the scent of the real killer by making you think it was someone else. This was done to disastrous effect in this movie because it has no bearing on the plot, the character, the outcome, or the twist. It could have been a copy of Highlights magazine he was obsessed with and just was going nuts for Goofus and Gallon, I guess. The mystery of how the number 23 affects him is rendered pointless because he's crazy, the guy who wrote it is crazy, and then they're the same person. You just get this disjointed, hot mess that feels like a bunch of stuff happens, and it's really interesting in the trailer, but it means nothing as a story. As such, the plot twist is actually hindered by the mystery by tossing it to the side. Again, it's a damn shame. Now, we got a little murky there, so if you want to see twists done right, I'd highly recommend A Few Kings. The Sixth Sense, The Usual Suspects, Memento, and Shutter Island. All of them contain plot twists that boggle the mind and actually justify the story they were telling. Now let's talk about why. Now, we've talked about where things go sideways, so let's talk about when it works right, and more importantly, why. It's not enough to know I need to have sympathy for my characters and my twists need to make sense. No, Mr. Smarty Pants, we need an understanding of why this magic is taking place. So, we're going to go with one of the all-time greats for this one, and that's the 1960 thriller Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. To give you an idea of how timeless this script is, the reboot by Gus Van Sant in 1998 is a shot-for-shot remake, meaning that every scene, every camera shot, and 90% of the dialogue is still the same, and it still worked. I actually love Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, but we're going to talk about the original masterpiece. Watch it in black and white until your eyes bleed. It's a beautiful thing. So, this movie works while having not one but two major plot twists that were risky and virtually unheard of at the time. First, we open on our protagonist, Marion Crane. She's stolen some money and she's on the run to meet up with her boyfriend in California so they can get married. Along the way, she stops at the Bates Motel. The owner, Norman Bates, is a lonely fellow. The motel hasn't seen people in a long time. He says it's just him and his mother in the house up on the hill. We spend an awkward, uncomfortable conversation between Marion and Norman over dinner, where he alludes to how much he hates the burden his mother's become. She's old and infirm, and he's lonely and wasting all of his marrying years caring for her with no friends. So, here comes the twist. As Marion decides to shower before bed and turn herself in come morning, Norman's mother comes at her in the shower with a knife and stabs her to death. Now keep in mind, this is 1960. People were still getting Elvis dancing to Jailhouse Rock. The idea of killing the main character a third of the way into the movie was completely unheard of. To keep this brief, Norman cleans up after the horrible murder his mother's done. Then Marion's boyfriend and her sister go looking for her. A private investigator hired by the company Marion stole the money from is looking for her too. They all converge on the Bates Motel and something about Norman seems off. The detective goes to confront Norman's mother, but she kills him too. Meanwhile, Marion's sister finds out that Norman's mother's been dead for years. She uncovers the truth and finds out Norman is his mother. He takes on her persona due to a multiple personality disorder. Now, there is so much good stuff going on here that we can actually overlook the fact that dissociative identity disorder doesn't work like this. People didn't know that then, so whatever. The thing is, we begin to sympathize with Marion, who made a mistake that has her in over her head, and then she meets Norman, and their conversation builds on his character too. You feel for the both of them. When Marion dies and initially appears, Norman is every bit the victim too, having to suffer for his mother's crimes. This is such great storytelling that I want to put a ring on it and marry it, okay? We get to know the private eye and Marion's sister Lila as they begin to get to the bottom of her disappearance, and Norman's under the hot seat, guilty of covering up his mother's murder and squirming to avoid getting caught. You almost understand his pain and the difficult position he's in, but then you find out it was him all along and he's just insane, and it works so well. Part of what makes this work so well is that we're invested in this extremely slim cast of characters. Every scene involving two of these 5 people, they're building up each other's characters through these tense, uncomfortable dialogue scenes. You're invested in them, you care about them, and then one of them betrays you, but he's been true to himself the whole time. Remember when we use the word contrived? We're talking about the opposite of this. Characters who suddenly change and become evil, even when it makes no sense, a change of direction or tone in the story, or using a twist to avoid keeping your promises. These are all rules we've talked about before, but these 3 genres are so much easier to screw it up in because it kills your ending. Your ending is the note people leave your work on. You can have it be sad or scary, and it still works. The bad guy can win or the hero can fail, and it can still satisfy your audience. Mess it up, though, and the whole work falls apart because of it. I'm going to touch on this one point very briefly, because it only affects visual mediums for the most part. So, if you're writing for stage or film, listen up. Startling someone is not the same as scaring someone. I'm going to say that one more time for the Hollywood horror writers in the back that can't hear me because they're too busy not watching Alfred Hitchcock or Wes Craven films. Having someone jump out of the darkness and startle your audience is not the same as scaring them so bad that they need to sleep with the lights on tonight. A startle is a reflex reaction. It's triggered by our body's natural aversion to fast-moving danger. We can't control the reaction, hence the term reflex. Scaring someone is putting an idea in their head that they find terrifying. The best scares stick with the audience long after the show's over. The idea of the monster being under your bed or waiting in the darkness, that's when you've made somebody truly afraid. Jump scares are cheap, easy, and at this point so predictable in modern horror I won't even watch a film that has them. I really find it that distasteful and lowbrow. I mean, I was in the parking lot the other day, reading my Facebook and minding my business, and this homeless lady came up behind me and asked me for some change. Startled the bejesus out of the master of Kung Fu and friendship. I almost whipped out my flying crane style. This homeless woman was not a master of horror. Do you hear me, Hollywood? Anybody can do this. This was a public service announcement. Thank you for your time. Like the title implies, horror and thrills thrive on the unknown. The secret evil that lurks in the shadows, the monster in the darkness, the thing that should not be hiding under your bed. You want to know how to make it less scary? Here's how. Go on. Take it in. These are the scary monsters of recent horror films. Now, if we do a little bit of this right here, and then a little bit of that right there, poof. So not scary anymore. The biggest mistake you can make in horror is showing the monster. Nothing you show will ever be as terrifying as what our mind puts in there. Less is always more in this category. The aliens in Signs, the aliens in A Quiet Place, or the alien in Cloverfield. You never show them. You glimpse them. You catch a quick look. You see them by the damage they cause, not by looking right at them. This is why the first Paranormal Activity worked. This is why Invasions of the Body Snatchers worked. Here, let me show you what I mean. Our protagonist, he lives in a house by himself. The house is haunted. What's more terrifying? A CGI transparent ghost of a child at the top of the stairs? Or an ethereal laughter at the top of the stairs, followed by a child's ball bouncing down the stairs? Bounce, bounce. See, one I can get used to seeing. The other will spook the crap out of me every time it happens and make me burn the house down. The lesson here is never look the monster square in the eye if you don't have to. Nothing you can come up with is as scary as what the audience will make up ourselves. So, you know who gets away with this twist? Nobody. That's who. Before you say, but wait, Wizard of Oz. Are you writing The Wizard of Oz? Because that one gets a pass for being the original. Yeah, absolutely sure. There are some exceptions. And we're going to talk about them. I know, I'm as excited for deep cut time as you are. But let's talk first. When you say it was all a dream, from the part the dream starts until it ends, you are rendering all of that meaningless. You take away all of the stakes, you remove any threat the antagonist ever had, you negate your own story. If it never happened, why did I read it? Why did I watch it? Why do I care? You have to be so careful with this twist, because unless you're bringing something wildly new to the table, you're never going to get away with it. So, here are the exceptions in no particular order. The aforementioned Wizard of Oz, Jacob's Ladder, Inception, and I'm kinda on the fence about American Psycho. All of these brought an original idea to this tired, cliche, beat-up plot twist. It can be downright frustrating, leaving the audience ever feeling robbed that all of the stakes were taken from them. They leave feeling unsatisfied, like that time the master of Kung Fu and friendship went to that burger joint and found out everything was made from tofu. Seriously, if you hate meat that much, why are you making sandwiches that are supposed to taste like it? Am I ranting? Yeah, you're damn right I'm ranting. Saying it was all a dream is like the vegan hamburger of story tropes. There, I said it. Look at what you made me do. So, taking it down a notch. we're going to go and look at what makes the original spin on this twist work, if you should be so bold to try it. Oh yeah, it's deep cut time, baby. This time, we're looking at the 1986 slasher movie, April Fool's Day. I love this movie, folks. It's one of the few horror movies that's in my personal collection. So again, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen this. I'll wait. Go out right now, run out and get a copy. It's literally $1.99. The Halloween stuff is probably already out at your Walmart. Get it? Love it. Okay. So, continuing on, April Fool's Day follows a crew of young college grads to the isolated summer home of Muffy St. John. Something great is going to happen at this party, but then they start dropping like flies. While our plucky heroine Kit is rushing to save her own life and solve the mystery of who's killing all of her friends, it looks like Muffy might have an evil twin sister that's taken her place. In the climax, trapped in a room with the killer Buffy, Kit finds out that it was a murder mystery dinner. See, Muffy wanted to turn her new house into an extreme murder mystery experience and tested the concept on all of her friends. What was a terrifying killer movie turns into a comedy at the end with everybody getting a good laugh. This kind of tonal shift can be jarring and actually destroy the enjoyment of a movie, but here it really works. Basically, the people who died were only let in on the joke afterwards, so the stakes were real enough. Their terror was real, they weren't faking it, so it doesn't come off as corny. Campy, sure, I'll give you that, but camp was actually pretty enjoyable, pretty well acted, and this sticks out as in a field full of chainsaw and hatchet-wielding maniacs of the 1980s. Horror, thrills, and plot twists all rely on knowing the psychology of an audience and preying on their weaknesses. Anyone who tells you this is a lower form of storytelling either isn't any good at it or hasn't seen anything that was. Make no mistake about it, this is difficult to pull off well. But to those that try, you know I have a blanket fort ready-made for us to be best friends. Help out the master of Kung Fu and friendship by hitting that like and subscribe button to hear about new videos, and as always, I'm DC Ferguson. Now have fun and get crafting.